Hi there, this is Dr. Anna Maria Helt here with Basmati.com, and this week I'm going to talk about Black Cohosh. And so here's some extract that I have going. It is indeed dark, and its botanical name now is Actea racemosa. It has changed again recently, as happens, and so it's Actea or AE. I suck at spelling. Racemosa, Racemosa. And so this is perhaps most famous as a quote women's herb, although it can be useful for men as well. And it's probably one of the more common uses is for perimenopausal and menopausal issues. And so there's a long tradition of use for things like hot flashes, and there are more and more studies in women showing, or backing up, I should say, the efficacy for use in hot flashes. And it actually does make its way into formulas for a number of my clients for that very issue. Other things that it's used for around perimenopause, menopausal transition is reduced bone density. And so research has found that Black Cohosh may actually help support bone growth, more dense bone structure. And also there is some work as well as traditional use showing benefits for things like vaginal dryness as well. And it's interesting in terms of the hot flashes, because you think something that's going to cool off hot flashes is overall a cooling herb, and in fact Black Cohosh shows other kind of cooling effects in the body and anti-inflammatory effects, but it's got some acridity to it in terms of the flavor. And acrid is often some heat, some kick to it, and so it does have interesting energetics. Now, this is an herb for the various things that I mentioned that is active in a very low dose. And just as an aside, this is also an herb traditionally used for depressive states, especially kind of that, as we were taught in herb school, that black cloud depression where you feel like there's always a dark cloud kind of following you around. And I have to admit, I tried it for myself for mood. And one thing about Black Cohosh, not to get too personal, is it actually messes up my own cycle. It can be really great for other women with cycle imbalances and such, whether that's timing or unwanted symptoms. But it's not everybody's herb, and it's actually not my herb. Every time I use it for myself, I wind up having some weird menstrual cycle issues kick in. So going back to trying to use it for mood, I thought, well, maybe, I know it already is a fairly low dose herb, but maybe if I do a really low dose, like an energetic dose, I can use it for mood and not have the cycle weirdness happen. And so I did 1 drop of Black Cohosh extract, just a 1 to 2 fresh root preparation, and it still messed up my cycle. So it's not my herb, but it actually is helpful for many other women. But it is a low dose herb. You really don't need much. Drop dosing, in my experience, both for myself and in my clinic, is enough. Now, and since we're talking about women's issues here, there is some fear out there around Black Cohosh. There's some conflicting information about its estrogenicity. And in reality, it does not contain phytoestrogens. Okay, Black Cohosh is not like red clover or hops in that regard, which do contain phytoestrogens. And to be clear, phytoestrogens are not estrogen. They are plants that in some way, shape, or form interact with our own hormonal system. And that gets too complicated to get into right now. Suffice it to say that Black Cohosh does not contain phytoestrogens. And there are conflicting studies in vitro, meaning in glass, in test tubes, or in cell culture models, as to whether it activates estrogen receptors or not. And I can tell you from experience, having done many cell culture and in other in vitro studies, that they're not always reflective of what goes on in the body. And so in actual clinical studies in women, we're not seeing estrogenicity. So for instance, there was a 6-month study, meaning women were put on Black Cohosh for 6 months to deal with menopausal issues, especially hot flashes. And by various markers, there were no systemic estrogenic effects noticeable. For instance, no change in the cells of the vagina, despite benefits for menopause. And in another study, where it was given to women for several months, they were looking at breasts. There was no increase in breast density. Increase in breast density would be a sign of estrogenic activity. No impact on circulating markers of estrogenic activity. And in another study looking at estrogenic effects in the uterus, there were none after Black Cohosh usage. And in fact, another clinical trial that used Black Cohosh in Chinese women for 3 months found that it induced fibroid shrinkage. Now, fibroids are benign tumors in the uterus that many of us women will have at some point in our cycling years, and they tend to be highly dependent, or highly responsive, I should say, to estrogen in stimulating their growth. And in this study, Black Cohosh did just as well, if not better, than a pharmaceutical drug in shrinking fibroids over 3 months. And in terms of looking more mechanistically at what this herb and its various components may be doing, rather than evidence for any estrogenic effects in vivo, it seems like it's having effects on a variety of neurotransmitter pathways. So maybe influencing dopamine and adrenergic receptors, so things that are responsive to adrenaline, serotonin-related effects, GABA-related effects. And so it's acting in a bigger way on our body through the endocrine system, through neurotransmitters and such. And this makes it similar, if not in terms of what it does in the long run, but to herbs like Vitex that are influencing the body kind of higher up in the brain. Anyway, so I mentioned earlier that this herb can be used in men, and it has been used by a number of herbalists for support with prostate issues in men. And it can also be great for men or women who are really stuck in their head, either over intellectualizing things or just kind of looping all the time. And I was taught by one of my herb teachers that it can really help bring you back down into the body. And so use for both sexes there. Now, I already mentioned its use for mood and kind of that black gloom and doom, depression or melancholy. It also has Black Cohosh also has traditional use here in North America for rheumatoid stuff, rheumatism, arthritis. It actually does contain aspirin precursors in it, but also other components that help reduce inflammation. And it can be particularly useful for low back pain, for muscle pain, for nerve pain. So here in North America, there is a long history of indigenous use of Black Cohosh medicinally for all of these various things. And to the extent that it is one that is at risk for over harvesting. So if you're going to use Black Cohosh, get it organically grown. It grows not out west where I am, but more back east in the forests there. And so there is pressure on this plant through deforestation as well as harvesting and other issues there. So just wanted to throw that out there. And you can learn more about plants that are under pressure, specifically medicinal plants, if you go check out United Plant Savers website, a really wonderful group whose focus is preservation and protection of medicinal plants. Now, pain relief, mood, menopausal and reproductive related issues. It's also an alternative. So Black Cohosh has some, I hate to use this word because it's overused, but detoxifying effects in the body. And so it's going to help us with waste metabolism and elimination, which has a huge benefit to various aspects of our function. And so a really useful herb. And even though the in vivo studies that I have read show no estrogenicity, no estrogenic effects, you still, because you still want to be careful. If you have a history, for instance, of estrogen receptor positive breast cancers, there are other useful herbs you can try. And it's not to scare you. I'm not trying to kind of stir that pot of the fear that's around this herb, but there just hasn't been enough work there. You know, it looks like an interesting herb in terms of its effect on fibroids and such. But until there are even more studies, you know, on exactly what is going on with this herb mechanistically, you might skip it with ER positive breast cancers. And is there anything else I want to mention? Don't use it while you're pregnant. It will be used sometimes by midwives closer to birthing time, but otherwise not one to be taken during pregnancy. And I think I will leave it at that. It is a wonderful herb. I've used it a lot in my practice. And if it's, you know, right for you, it can be a really great ally. And I swear I am going to shut up. One more thing I wanted to point out is it's stunningly beautiful. It is a gorgeous herb. I've not encountered it in the forest back east because I don't live there anymore, but I've grown it myself in my garden, and my good friend Karen at Open Gate Herbs has it growing, and it's absolutely gorgeous with its beautiful green leaves and its flower stalks topped with white racemes of flowers. Lovely plant if you ever get to meet it in person. And so I went on a little longer this time, but this herb deserves a lot of respect, and there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. So I wanted to take some time with it. Until next time, be well.